Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the new romantic comedy, Fly Me to the Moon. I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So, as we all know, one of the complaints you just often hear these days about the entertainment industry is that Hollywood just doesn't make original movies. It's all sequels and big franchises and IP. Although that seems to be changing at least this year, because much like The Fall Guy as well as Argyle, which came out earlier this year, Fly Me to the Moon does offer audiences an original story, a romantic comedy that, at least on the surface, seems to have kind of all the raw material needed for success. But making an original story is one thing, making a good original story is something else entirely. And unfortunately, to me, Fly Me to the Moon just struggles to fashion all its intriguing elements into a great film. Because despite a refreshingly original concept, as well as a few shining moments, the film's attempted liftoff is ultimately derailed just by a very uneven tone and several puzzling creative decisions. And if you're not familiar with, what this movie is all about, Fly Me to the Moon is kind of a quasi-historical drama about NASA's Apollo 11 moon landing, which supplements sort of the true events with sort of an imaginative origin of the famous conspiracy theories about, faking the moon landing. And I think it's a really interesting approach, even if the filmmakers don't fully capitalize on its potential, because I like parts of this movie. I think it is entertaining at times. It does have several jokes that are effective, that do land, at least with the theater that I was seeing this with, and it does have a kind of a fun retro 1960s aesthetic. And for a movie that is about space exploration, I think it's also fitting that this film assembles, some notable star power. Scarlett Johansson, she's one of the premier leading ladies in Hollywood today, and I think she does most of the heavy lifting for this film, because she brings a lot of energy and charisma to a character that could very easily, with a different actress, be a very unlikable and unsympathetic character. And she is joined by actor Channing Tatum, who unfortunately gives a slightly less inspired performance in this. And it's not that he's even bad as much as just boring. I think casting a mostly an actor known mostly for comedic roles as the more straight-laced and serious character in the story is just a very curious choice. I think that emphasizes a lot of the weaknesses of Channing Tatum as an actor while muting a lot of his strengths. But arguably the most noticeable turbulence in this film's flight path is just its very unclear tone, because Fly Me to the Moon kind of shows hints at the more zany, over-the-top comedy that this film could have been, particularly with Woody Harrelson's character, but it just never kind of fully commits to that approach. And kind of in a similar way, most of this film unfolds as relatively family friendly type movie. Although then there are other moments such as a very completely unnecessary F-bomb in this that suggest a more unrealized harder edge. And even just the personality of Channing Tatum's character almost seems to fluctuate from scene to scene, where in one moment he's a very goofy, kind of bumbling, lighthearted guy, and then in the next scene he's very stoic and grumpy. And kind of in a similar way, kind of the budding relationship between Scarlett Johansson's character and Channing Tatum's characters at least gave me a sense of whiplash, where a lot of the emotional drama in one scene just rarely seem to carry over to the next, almost as though we were missing key pieces of information and interactions between those scenes. And another aspect of this movie that I think will be notable for Christian audiences is that the film seems to have a somewhat bumpy perspective towards Christianity, because initially it does seem like it leans into many of the standard familiar Hollywood tropes towards religion, featuring a very swarmy, dim-witted, kind of anti-science politician. And there's a scene between Johansson and Tatum's characters with this sort of religious politician where they are kind of imploring him to give funding to NASA. And in that encounter, Tatum's character kind of delivers this very impassioned religious speech, and he begins quoting scripture and declaring that his hope is that future space exploration will bring people closer to God. And kind of the initial implication as the audience is that Tatum is mocking and being very insincere towards this religious senator, and even Johansson's character kind of compliments him for how successful of a ruse that he has just done, only for the very surprising and unexpected revelation that Tanim's character is, in fact, being entirely genuine with what he said and what he believes about God and kind of, space exploration. And kind of as a result, I think Christian audiences may have different feelings about where this movie seems to land, because it does provide, I think, a very unexpectedly positive example of Christianity in a mainstream Hollywood film, while almost like simultaneously furthering some of the negative stereotypes of people of faith. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this. For language, like I said, there's one F-bomb near the end of this movie, as well as just sort of a collection of minor profanities scattered here and there all throughout. For violence, really nothing gratuitous in any way here. Sort of the tragic event of the Apollo 1 disaster, in which 3 astronauts were killed in a cabin fire during testing, is shown several times throughout this movie, although the accident is it's always depicted from kind of outside the spacecraft, so we don't actually see the astronauts suffering, although their screams are audible. As far as sexuality, really the only thing here is that in the movie, the director that is hired to film the fake moon landing is very clearly a gay man, and his relationship with another man is mentioned by a different character, and really like his flamboyance becomes almost like his sole defining character trait. As far as things going on beneath the surface with themes and worldview, in many ways this film almost acts as like a social commentary on just our cultural moment, where there's a lot of talk about controlling the narrative, and just in our nation today you hear a lot of talk about a growing distrust with the media and the narratives that they're telling us, as well as a lot of talk of conspiracies and lies, and what do we believe, what is true, who can we trust, and kind of using the narrative framework of a faked lunar landing and kind of controlling the narrative. The film kind of probes some of those kind of contemporary issues. And in the film, Kelly Jones, who is Scarlett Johansson's character, and Cole Davis, who is Tatum's character, kind of represent 2 polarized approaches. Jones, she's an expert marketer who really doesn't ever hesitate to go to great lengths to sell her product, even when, doing so requires her to lie and like manipulate people and the situation. And in contrast, Davis is really stubbornly convicted that people deserve to, just hear the naked truth, and he forgoes a lot of the crowd drawing gimmicks and instead hopes to just inspire people with his true authenticity. And those differing attitudes are probably most evident during that scene I mentioned earlier with the religious politician, because while Jones is kind of putting on a very fake Southern accent and attempting to lie her way into this man's good graces and hopefully, garner his financial support, Davis speaks very candidly from his heart about his shared religious values, and ultimately it is Davis's approach that proves to be successful in that moment. And kind of afterwards, as the 2 characters are debriefing about what happened in that meeting, Davis makes an interesting comment to Jones where he says, "Believe it or not, you can win over people simply by being yourself." Because right at the end of this film, there's a quote that very much, I think, encapsulates sort of the message, the theme that this film is going for, where Johansson's character says, "The truth is still the truth if no one believes it. A lie is still a lie, even if everyone believes it." And kind of the sense that you can control the narrative, but you can't change the truth, and there's power in proclaiming the truth. And even as Jesus himself said to his followers, "Know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So in the end, Fly Me to the Moon is kind of a difficult film to pin down. I didn't hate this movie. I enjoyed parts of it. I just don't know how much I liked it. I think its sort of unpredictability, unevenness can be refreshing at times, although I think does, for the most part, result in a somewhat frustrating experience. And I don't think it would surprise me to learn, at some point that this movie underwent extensive edits and alterations as the studio or the filmmakers just, struggled to plant their flag in a singular vision for this story. Because there are various hypothetical versions of this movie that I think may have soared to greater heights, but just as a collection of assorted and often conflicting ideas, I think it ends up being just a little bit too silly to work as a drama, while also taking itself just a bit too seriously to work as like an oddball comedy, which ultimately leaves it just sort of lost in space. But hey, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you go check this movie out, if you enjoyed it, if maybe you shared some of the, the critiques that I had, whatever the case may be, jump it in the comment section. Let's have a conversation about that. If you haven't done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of movie reviews and a podcast and interviews and just other fun stuff. Would love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide through World for Christ.